Welcome back to the Between Breaths podcast. We've had a little bit of a break, haven't we? I apologies, was running up and down Snowdon for the Head for Change charity far too many times. If you haven't seen the YouTube video, do check that out. But we're here today, episode 18, speaking with Conni from Breathwork Alchemy. And Connie's fantastic coach, speaker, and has an amazing outlook on breathwork as a whole. Some of which comes from her own journey, and within her own journey that she will talk about in this podcast, has explored basically everything when it comes from breathwork. And she is someone that I was very interested in getting onto the podcast because there's not often you get practitioners that have done and scoped out all angles, everything from the hyperventilation work to the functional breathing, the oxyvantage, and everything in between. So she has a very unique outlook on breathwork as a whole. And I'm sure you will be as intrigued as I was asking questions during this interview. So I really enjoyed this. Very great, rounded view and approach. And I think that where she's got to and how she teaches with this now, I think you'll find very interesting. And I certainly I found it interesting, but also found it very encouraging as well. So sit back, relax, enjoy either listening to or watching, if you're watching on YouTube, to Conni from Breathwork Alchemy on the Between Breaths podcast. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly, we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. So, Conni, welcome to the Between Breaths podcast. I guess, first of all, am I saying that? Am I saying Conni? Am I saying it right?
Conni sounds perfect, and last name is Biesalski. That's the
Yeah,
more
I didn't even
complicated
dare.
one.
I didn't even dare attempt that. I'll try to attempt that. Maybe you can do some lessons. Thank you for coming on to the Between Breaths podcast.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to talk with you, and I'm sure the listeners are going to be as well. And because I've followed you for, we were saying this off air, I followed you for your work and what you're doing for a long time, and there's a really interesting, hopefully eye-opening and ear-opening and maybe heart and nervous system opening conversation with you, because you are in your work bringing together both the functional breathing, the scientific evidence-based stuff with the to quote a phrase on your website, ancient wisdom and the trauma release and the stress and the nervous. So it's such a wide scope of breathwork modalities that you teach and bring together. Just give the listeners, and a lot of them will have be following you already on Instagram and whatnot, but just give us a little bit of what are the number of things that you do, and just introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Jacko.
No, pleasure's
Such
all
an
mine.
honor. Yeah. Um, yeah, where to begin? I discovered the world of breathwork. I don't know, maybe I think it was 2017 or so.
Yeah.
I was deep in my personal development healing journey. I was struggling a lot with anxious attachment in relationships, so that was my main driver to figure out healing and figure myself out. And then also depression and just, yeah, I was a real seeker, and I had been for many years.
Okay.
I was initiated in 2012 after a breakup that completely like tore me open, and I didn't really know what to do with my
Yeah.
life anymore, and I didn't have any tools. And so, I
Mm.
was traveling around the world. I was very nomadic for a very, very long time since I was a teenager, and I was trying to find answers, and I was trying to find modalities and practices that would help me to sort of ease my suffering. And so I initially found my way into that my inner journey, I guess, via Buddhism back in 2012. And,
Right.
I started meditating and eventually became a meditation teacher and a yoga teacher. But and I'd done a lot of therapy, a lot of talk therapy. I
Yeah.
went to all the Tony Robbins events. I went to all the Dr. Joe Dispenza
Right.
retreats, and done all the plant medicine and ayahuascas and whatnot. And I mean, I'm not saying nothing was helpful. I mean, they
Yeah.
definitely played their part, but nothing was really sustainable, and I was
Okay.
still suffering at the end of the day. I was
Yeah.
still struggling in relationships. I had looking back, I didn't know that at the time, but I had an incredibly dysregulated nervous system, a very dysfunctional breathing pattern.
Yeah.
Um, and so in 2017, I discovered holotropic breathwork, and I was in Los Angeles, and I went to an intro workshop, and I had really no idea what I was getting myself into. And I mean, yeah, having studied yoga and meditation for quite some time, I knew about the breath and pranayama, of course, but I wasn't really that interested in breathing that much at the
Yeah.
time. And so I went to
And
this workshop.
holotropic is you're holotropic, you're deep it, you're straight in.
Yeah, I had no clue. I just knew altered states of consciousness, and I think I heard about it in some podcast. And so I went and had a very profound experience, very emotional experience, and was was very impressed by what I was able to do and feel and experience just by using my breath. And it took another while for me to really dive into breathwork deeper and more consistently, and that took another breakup. Like
Right.
for me, breakups were always my sort of the dynamite in my personal development, because there was always so much suffering attached to it.
Yeah.
And so then eventually I dove much deeper into transformational breathwork, and because I knew I couldn't just figure this breakup or the pain of the breakup out in my head and just doing talk therapy and affirmations and mindset work
Yeah.
and reading books. I knew I needed to get down to the level of my body. And so I just tried out all sorts of different breathwork modalities and teachers. And I was living in Bali at the time, and breathwork was sort of taking off there at the time.
Yeah.
And then I just found so much healing through this kind of breath work. And I was able to really start connecting to my emotions in a way that I hadn't been connected to them before. And it was really my bridge into my body for sure. And so after a while, I got really interested to explore the breath further, and I started learning about the nervous system, and so this whole world opened up.
Yeah.
And then I heard about Patrick McEwen and Oxygen Advantage, and I got into that, and then Buteyko, and so I got certified in both of those modalities, and then you know how it goes. It just
Yeah.
goes deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And then started learning more about trauma and working with the body, and rather than with the mind, to
Mm.
find healing and to regulate our nervous system. And so, and then here we are today.
Yeah.
I guess that brings
You've
us
made it
to,
onto the Between Breasts podcast, which
yeah, which is
um,
wild in a way, but yeah.
I well, yeah, equally wild, because if I think of what I was doing 10 years ago, I was just 10 years ago, I was trying to recover from a brain injury from rugby, like
Yeah.
with no
Yeah.
idea about breathing at all. But that's a different. I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't necessarily think I was going to ask you.
Mhm.
But you talked about, and I sort of nodded along, and you were like, when someone says something, they sort of, you say it and you nod to encourage them, and then I start nodding to it, and it was like you talked about, came across, Oxford Vantage, Patrick McEwen's work, Buteyko, and down that rabbit hole, and it go and just going deeper. One of the things that I just love about breathing, breath work, breath training, however we want to phrase want to use for it though, is that if you want to go down there, you can go down there and start to see on you know, on the tiniest detailed level, how breathing is influencing your physiology. And then there's even there's other stuff that I'm sure we're going to get to talk about that we don't even know yet. We haven't even explained it yet in terms of scientifically, because they just can't measure it, they can't study it. But you can go down there, but what I've found is like going down there sort of helps cement a lot of understanding for a lot of us of just, okay, scientifically it's doing something to me which will just let me, like, up here cognitively, um, trust it. But when you come back out, you go, well, actually, it's really easy in terms of some of, not everything, but just into particular some of the stuff that I teach around, like, functional breathing, the oxygen advantage side of things. You go, like, some of it's easy for some people. It's like they just feel a world different when they close the mouth and breathe through the nose a bit, or they slow down a bit. Well, it can be easy. Where's for you? Where's that balance of, like, when I zoom back out, I can go down the rabbit hole. When I zoom back out, I just go, wow, this thing's so powerful. It affects all those things deep down there. But all I've got to do is ask someone to do this, this, and this. What are those like? If you could only spend 5 minutes with someone, or say
Mm-hmm.
3 things to them, or I don't know, I'm not going to put a number on it, but you have a small amount of time. Like, what do you say to them?
Yeah, yeah. Such a good question. And I think you're right, because as we dive into the rabbit hole and we explore all these different modalities and practices and techniques and the different ways that we can use our breath, right? Like
Yeah,
it's mind-blowing, right?
yeah. But you've
And
still only got
then
two options in terms of, like, you've got your nose or your mouth. Like, you can go as deep down that rabbit hole as you want, but you've got to come back and you got to choose one of those. Back, choose one of
yeah,
those, and it ain't.
exactly. Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly. And you can inhale and exhale and you can hold your breath, sort of.
there's
Like
not
that's
much.
basically it.
Yeah, yeah. What are we even here
But
for? Yeah,
damn, there's so many different ways that you can use these variables.
yeah,
And so yeah, so you dive in, and then I think what happens to a lot of us, we dive in and we like experiment and use this technique and this and that, and then eventually we come back out again and we zoom out and we're like, oh wow, actually it's actually really simple. It
yeah,
doesn't take that much. And I think that's comparable to so many journeys that we take in life. It's
yeah,
at least for a lot of learners and curious humans out there, where we explore something that we're really inspired by, and then we learn everything about it, try a lot of stuff out, and then we reduce it to the essentials again,
yeah,
because it's not sustainable to constantly be using 100 techniques. And so if I had 5 minutes and I needed to tell someone who had a dysfunctional breathing pattern and was maybe stressed out a lot, and how to use the breath in the most efficient way, like the 80-20 rule, I guess.
yeah, yeah,
um, then I'd say, probably very similar to what you would say. Just nose breathe. Just try to nose breathe 24/7 when you're walking, when you're, driving your car, when you're working, 24/7. Tape your mouth at night. And then diaphragmatic breathing. Just try and get your breath down low. And then besides that, yes, check in with your breathing several times a day to just see how it's flowing. Is it fast? Is it in your chest? Is it in your belly? Is it
mm,
nose? Is it mouth? But then when it comes to, let's say, daily practice, I would reduce it to coherence breathing, to a count of 4 or 5, and then some nice diaphragmatic breathing, and then maybe work up to a slight air hunger if they can. But I think in the beginning, it's just about getting them to reconnect to their breath and their
yeah,
body, make it really simple. And then we can add on something like air hunger to actually work on our CO2 tolerance in the long term. But that's as simple as I would
yeah,
do. Yeah.
yeah. Nice.
What do you
No, no.
think?
Yeah, no, no. I love it. I love it. I love the fact that, like, well, we'll get into, like, nervous system wise, that slowing down of the breath, connecting with your breath, and even just thinking about my breathing. We've shown there's within literally, like, just thinking about your breathing will help you to slow it down just by that, literally by that
Mm,
fact. And when we
true.
slow, it's not, we don't have to be a neuroscientist to go, oh, when I breathe slower and calmer, I feel calm and my heart rate's a bit slower and calmer. Okay, I can make that link as to why that's going to be calming for my nervous system.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it, that it's not super complex, as you say.
Mm.
I think one thing to take advantage for the listeners of, I don't know if I do know anybody else, maybe, but I don't know if there's anyone else that's sort of done Oxygen Advantage, Buteyko, Transformational, Holotropic, Somatic, Yoga, meditation will have elements of breathing in. Like, just go through the list of all those things that you've done, and we're not going to hierarchy them of which is best. They're all sort, but just what are they? Like,
Mm.
well, some
Mm-hmm.
people will hear those terms and like, yeah, is there any sort of way of you classify them? You know, I've mentioned before about sort of some things that they have in common is that there might be, based on, there's a hyperventilation part to it. Is that one way to categorize certain ones or not? Like, where do you, yeah, where are these things? Just differentiate them. What, explain them for people, because some people have heard these, but they might not
Totally.
actually know really what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, Buteyko is all about functional breathing and especially working with pathological breathing patterns, but also, let's say asthma, yes, but also, burnout, stress, anxiety, panic attacks, sleeping issues, sleep apnea, snoring, dysfunctional breathing with kids, people with chronic pain, that sort of stuff. And for me, that mostly using the breath, yes, to create a functional breathing pattern, but really to regulate the nervous system. I think that's what it's all about.
Okay.
And then Oxygen Advantage for me is sort of
So
like the
you think so?
next.
Just
Yeah.
so for you, like Buteyko, actually one of the underpinning things being relating to nervous system.
I don't think they talk
No,
about it very much at
no,
all.
yeah.
I don't think in
That's
the
why I stopped. I went,
curriculum.
hold on, yeah, I did, yeah, but
Yeah.
do you, almost that they, that's what it's doing, or one of the things that it's doing, but they don't know that's what it's doing, but they just know it works, or they just choose
I
not to talk
just
about it that way.
Yeah, I don't know if it's conscious or not. I don't think Patrick talks about the nervous system too much. It's just
Mm,
not how he approaches his work and teaching and breathing. But in the end, when we establish a functional breathing pattern,
yeah,
then we establish or we help in establishing a regulated nervous system
mm,
because, as you mentioned before, they both go together,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
The more we establish, healthy breathing, slower breathing, and find more grounding in our breath, the more our nervous system can sort of relax, regulate itself, find a balance, the more we can build up our heart rate variability and thus, improve our stress resilience. And so it's all connected in the end. And I guess maybe in Oxygen Advantage or Buteyko, they do talk maybe a little bit about HRV.
yeah,
And in the end, HRV is just telling us about the health of our nervous system.
yeah. It
And
existed
so,
before we measured it.
yeah. um, and so, yeah, so that's how I look at,
Yeah,
my work is yes, it's the breath and it's so much about nervous system regulation.
yeah,
I think the one and like, as we say, if you have a chaotic breath, you probably have a chaotic mind. Like if you have a calm
yeah,
breath, you
yeah,
probably you're more likely to have a calmer mind and a calmer
yeah,
body. So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and then we have Oxygen Advantage, which is Patrick's sort of he developed the Buteyko practice a bit further. I
yeah,
think the way he
yeah.
talks about it, he developed it mainly for men. He wanted to get men to get excited about breathing,
Which,
essentially, and
look, it's worked, but
it's
at the
worked.
same
Look at
time,
you, right? Yeah.
we're doing me and Matt Bagwell are doing a certification in Brighton at the end of March.
Hmm.
This it might be April by the time this is out. But we had 10 people book on so far, and 9 of them are women. So
No
it,
way.
yeah, no,
Really?
it
That's
the
cool.
the Oxford Advance has definitely helped with
Must be a
men.
looks then, Chaco.
No, but men has helped. It's helped men get involved. But one of the lovely things about it is it hasn't put women off, even though it potentially is marketed a
Yeah.
little bit more
Yeah.
masculine in its
Yeah. Well, if you
marketing.
look at the, what's the Here we go. You know?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the instructor
the
manual.
instructor
People
manual,
watching on the
like
video.
that's, I
There's a
mean,
picture of Conni on the front.
I
No.
tried my best in the gym today, but
Yeah.
yeah. So that obviously tells you a lot about
Yeah.
who this might be geared to.
I've got a good story actually of as a master instructor, I teach the certification, so send out manuals to people when they sign up. And a guy emailed me. It was like a brown sort of envelope arrived with like a book in, and he said he like rushed away to he was dead excited knowing it was going to be his instructor manual. And he said his wife like came into the room because he ran like a little sort of excited schoolboy to get open it up, and he said his wife thought, what on earth is going on? Because he pulls out of this thing. She's thinking, is it a porn mag or something? There's a picture of a naked gay guy. Not sorry, naked. Sorry, if I don't know. There's a naked guy on the front. He's not naked; he's just topless on the front. And he said his wife was like, "What is going on here?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just breathing. Don't worry." Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, so I'm happy to hear that there's so many women that are interested
I'll
in doing the
probably
training.
easily, it's for me when I do stuff, it's like it's 50-50. It's not it's not biased.
Well, it
Really.
didn't repel me, and I
Yeah.
identify as a woman, so
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, that was Patrick's, I guess, motivation in the beginning, because he saw so many women do the Buteyko training with him.
Yeah.
And wanted to get more men involved and get more men connected to their breath and to their bodies. And so it's more, I guess, geared, also judging from the cover of the instructor manual, towards athletes and
Yes, there's a
peak
sporting
performers.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it. And again, yes, but in the end, again, I think it's a lot about regulation, nervous system regulation, right? It's very similar to Buteyko, and yet it's a little bit more creative in a sense, maybe also because Buteyko is a little bit limited in some ways,
to sticking
how you
to
can
that
use it.
remit.
And to be able to call it Buteyko, right? Like you got to use it in a certain way.
And I find that with Oxygen Advantage, it's a case of essentially there is a certain number of exercises that fit within its method, but that's just some exercises that have come out of, again, evidence-based stuff. But what you learn and then what we teach when we're teaching it is just the principles of how of the science of breathing, how breathing influences your physiology. And what I love about it is that it just gives you that bedrock of just base level, not just base level, but it gives you that those scientific principles that aren't going to change, that anything else you can understand from. If you understand those, you can go and look at anything else and understand what's going on physiologically within the body. Yeah.
And I think any person out there that calls themselves a breath worker and is teaching the breath should be doing Oxygen Advantage and or Buteyko trainings as like a foundation,
to know the science.
Because that equips you with everything you need to know to really safely and efficiently use the breath. And then you can always adjust it and be creative with it, but then you actually know how it all fits together. And I think that's what maybe a lot of people, and that's what I saw in the yoga, meditation, pranayama department, a lot of people were lacking and not having that understanding. And I think actually that is also a big part of Patrick's work now with anastasis, is bringing breathwork and Oxygen Advantage to yoga teachers. And I actually did the yoga Oxygen Advantage program back then. I think the first one they ran a couple of years ago.
So there's a specific, just for the listeners, there's a specific Oxygen Advantage certification for yoga. That's what
for yoga teachers.
So one
and
thing
then for me, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say so what's potentially quite different then is within the Oxygen Advantage, we don't there isn't any exercises that are hyperventilation based.
No, and they're not.
Whatever the reasons can, but when you talk about,
for very good reason.
Yeah, but when you talk about transformational, when you talk about holotropic and potentially in the somatic, this is what from yourself, like, are all of those based on some hyperventilation, or all of it is based on, or like, where there's a step change between Buteyko, Oxygen Advantage, and then into these other modalities? Describe those things for us.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, one thing I wanted to add
Sorry,
also why I love Buteyko and Oxygen Advantage is because they have they essentially bring together breathwork on the mat and breathwork off the mat. And I think that's also what makes them very special and unique and so effective, because we actually take breathwork off the mat into our lives. Let it be as a preparation for
an
exercise
everyday
or
tool.
workout. It's an
Yeah,
everyday tool.
yeah. That's a really good point. Really good point.
And I think that yeah, that's what I love about it too, as a practitioner and also as a teacher. So now, yeah, let's go to the transformational style breathwork. And yes, the way I teach it is hyperventilation. Yes, we have a very long list of contraindications, so it's not for everyone at all. And at best, you know, if I work with someone one-on-one, for example, I would like to do breath coaching beforehand, get them to a nice bold score of, 20, 25 before I then actually do a transformational style breathwork session. That would be the best case scenario. Let's install a functional breathing pattern first before we then dive into hyperventilation practice. Now, with Buteyko and Oxygen Advantage, for me, it's really about the day-to-day breathing. It's about, yes, breathwork practices on the mat and off the mat on a daily basis. And it's about regulating your nervous system. Whereas transformational style breathwork, hyperventilation practices is, for me specifically, with a very clear intention, and that is to close stress cycles or complete emotional stress cycles, to be able to access material that lives in our unconscious or subconscious, that might have been living there for a very long time, maybe since we were, babies, or even, birth traumas. So it could be trauma material. It doesn't have to be, but it's a wonderful way to get in touch with our emotions and to get in touch with that more unconscious material, to process it, to bring it up to the surface, to process it. And essentially what we do is it's set up in a way, these sessions, they go for about an hour or so, and we start very slowly. There's always a specifically designed music set that goes with the session. So no music set is ever the same the way I teach it. I always really adjust it to the group, to the individual, whatever the needs are. And so we slowly, we start breathing. Sometimes we dance just to kind of get into our bodies first. It just helps a lot of people. Or we do like an intro meditation. And then we start getting into the breath, which is, I instruct it in different ways because in order to really teach this kind of breathing in a trauma-informed and nervous system-informed way, I think it's important to give options. And so there are schools like holotropic breathwork, rebirthing and whatnot. They mainly teach mouth breathing. And I give options. I give all the 3 gears. I'm like, hey, if you experience or if you feel really confident, then go with mouth in, mouth out. But then we have 2 more options, with in through the nose, out through the mouth, or you can just do nose breathing, right? And we call the breath or the technique conscious connected breathing. So yes, it's conscious, but it's also connected. So we connect the in-breath and the out-breath, right? And so yes, we off-gas a lot of CO2, which has an effect in how our brain is oxygenated. And that has an effect on us entering these altered states of consciousness. I mean, there isn't that much research on it yet. There are some studies on holotropic breathwork, but we sort of also borrow a bit of research from the research on psychedelics and especially like LSD and psilocybin. And what happens during those sessions is that certain areas of the default mode network in the brain sort of go offline, which then enables us to kind of bypass that ego mind and be able to access these emotions, process them, or access memories, access experiences that we normally wouldn't be able to access in our day-to-day life.
Can we just pause there, just because some of that might be quite new for people, and just the you were saying that the conscious connected breath is about connect it so that inhale and exhale, there's no pause going in between. It's like it's a cyclical breath. You're saying, it could be mouth, or it could be nose, mouth, or it could be nose, nose. And
Just
I think you
nose.
just described them as gears, and the strongest gear being the mouth because it's a bigger vessel and will allow it to
Yes.
move faster. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I think this is one of the really interesting questions. I think you actually, it's complicated. I think you explained it like, that's why I like talking to you, because it's complicated stuff, but it's with a lens of like, this is probably some of the things that are going on when we sort of join up. There's some dots, is because as you were talking earlier, I was like, oh, so yeah, what is the how is this letting these emotions come to the surface? And if I'm understanding this right, that we're using a breath as a tool to influence our brain states, shut off certain parts of the brain, so that almost gets out of the way, and these other things that were buried down are coming out. Am I sort of getting that? Yeah.
That's pretty much, that's well summarized. And we also use movement and sounding as a way to
Okay.
elicit emotions or to close these stress cycles or these incomplete reflexes.
Yeah.
If we
What does that mean? What does closing a stress cycle mean?
Yeah. So let's say we experience a traumatic event, or we never really learn how to process an emotion, let's say anger. And we essentially, if we think about the cycle of an emotion, the we're triggered, we feel the emotion doing its thing, there's sensations in our bodies, and it usually, well, we call it a cycle, but it also works like a wave, right? So we go
Right.
up the wave after we were triggered. There's this peak moment of when we're fully feeling the emotion, anger, sadness, whatever, and then eventually, if we let it actually process through us and flow through us, then we come back down the other side of the wave. Or we close that cycle, we close that, this,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
stress cycle of an emotion, because any emotion really is just charge that's building up in our bodies. And what it really wants is to just do its thing, flow through us, and for us to get out of the way, and then it can move on and it can
Yeah.
transform.
Is there any
And
bit of, this might be totally not right, but is there any part of it saying like charge and then saying it's trying to find its way out? Is there any element of like earthing where, grounding? Is that, getting barefoot on? Is it when you say charge, is there any element to it that's like, as in literally like electrical charge that would be?
It is an energy activation would be another word maybe
No. Yeah.
that you could use. It's you know when we think about an emotion like anger, you can really feel the energy
Yeah.
in your body, right? It's an activation in your nervous system. We shift from maybe one moment we were nice and chill and relaxed, and then sitting on the couch in parasympathetic ventral vagal mode, and then our partner says something to us that triggers us, and then boom, our nervous system shifts right into fight or flight. We get angry, and depending on our conditioning, programming, and how we deal with that emotion of anger, let's say I shut down my anger because I was taught that anger is not
Yeah.
good to feel. I shouldn't feel anger. It's a bad emotion, and so I shut it down. I pretend I'm not angry, and so I respond, but I'm actually overriding the signals
Yeah.
of my body and the reaction of my nervous system. And so that anger, it doesn't just dissipate just
Right.
because I
Yeah. Yeah.
suppress
Yeah.
it, right? It doesn't just go away, which is what we might think. It's
Yeah.
just like, well, I've kind of put it away, and now it's gone. I can just
Yeah.
move on. But that energy, those stress hormones, right? The adrenaline and the cortisol, like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
running through our
Yeah.
system. And so if we keep on suppressing that, and if that eventually that stuff builds up, builds up, builds up, and anger is one of those emotions. If you suppress anger, for your entire life since you were a little baby, then eventually it has to come out. Something's gotta give. And so that's what I mean also by stress cycle is if we always just push down the anger, that stress cycle never gets to complete. The stress
Right.
hormones, the energy of the anger, of that emotion keeps living in our body somewhere, goes into our tissues. It doesn't, the hormones don't get metabolized. And so I think we can make up a lot with exercise and moving our body,
Okay.
to be
Yeah.
honest. I think we can do a lot with that. And I think it affects people worse that don't move as much.
Is there is there an
Mhm.
element in that that when we're moving, we're helping? I'm just thinking of like the lymph system in that when you're talking about some of these things not being a way out, like the lymph
Mhm. Yeah.
is a system to allow for that sort of
To
detoxification.
metabolize and
Yeah,
detox the hormones. Yeah, for sure. But also, if we think about fight or flight, I mean, you know, if we didn't have this ego mind, and if we didn't have all this conditioning
yeah,
sitting on top of an emotional reaction like anger, right?
yeah,
Then, if I would get angry, I would either fight or flight, right? I would
yeah,
either yell or scream or push away,
yeah.
to set a
An outlet
boundary.
for that energy.
Yeah, or I would run away. That's what
Yeah,
the sympathetic nervous system does when I shift into activation. When I'm angry, it mobilizes
yeah,
energy for me to either fight or run away. And so now I have all this energy in my body, but I'm not doing anything with
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then, like, you could even, let's think about a lot
It's
of.
crazy actually that we think we're like, oh yeah,
Mm,
I'll just suppress that, and like you're saying, like for all that stuff that's been created to help you then go and either do your fight or flight, you don't
yeah,
use it. It's like
yeah, yeah.
it's going to be
So yeah,
somewhere.
then what? Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, let's just think about a lot of people playing video games and like these very like these let's say these fighting games, right? And so we're sitting there and we have this joystick in our hands. I don't know what you call it these days. And then
yeah. I ain't got a Game Boy anymore. My mum
and
wouldn't let me
then
play fighting games. Mum was right, I think, by the sounds of
yeah.
it.
But we're activating our sympathetic nervous system while playing these games, but we're not moving our bodies. It's actually wild if you think about it. There's
Yeah,
all this energy being created in our bodies while we're playing these games, but we're not, it keeps sitting in our bodies. And so that's why we then have a lot of teenagers or kids, struggling with ADHD or ADD, because I mean, this energy's got to
yeah,
go
that makes a
somewhere,
lot of sense.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, anyway, so that's will be an emotional stress cycle,
yeah,
and if we don't allow ourselves to complete that, and that has a lot to do with how we learned how to deal with emotions and how we're
yeah,
conditioned and society and what's expected of us, and on how we deal with something like anger. But
yeah,
then doing a transformational breathwork session is almost like we're giving us a permission slip. Like, I'm going to lie down, I'm going
yeah,
to give myself an hour, and I'm going to, get myself with intention into a sympathetic state, in an activated state.
yeah.
I'm triggering a stress response essentially, um,
But you're
on
choosing to do
purpose.
it, which is
I'm
yeah,
choosing to
exactly.
do it.
That's a big difference.
So I'm doing that consciously, and then slowly the music builds up and it reaches a sort of peak, and which usually coincides with an emotional peak and maybe an emotional release, or whatever. I mean, the difference, the experiences are very different. Everybody
Hmm.
has a different experience. Some people, the first time they do it, not much happens. Some people do it for the first time like I did back then, and mind-blowing
Blew the
experience.
top off.
Yeah, and then eventually we come back down, and this is a very important part of a session, is the integration piece, the relaxation piece. So the music comes down, is when we essentially, is how an emotional stress cycle should be completed.
Right.
Is, we come up, we release the energy, and then we come back down in a safe space.
Right.
We relax into it, and let's say as a child, we have an anger tantrum, and we
Yeah.
come back down and we are held by a parent, and they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
hey, everything's good, everything's
Yeah.
fine, that's,
Yeah. You're
no
loved.
worries. Yeah, you're loved. And so I guide through this sort of wave. I guide the breathers through it, and I utilize voice and words and affirmations, as
Yeah.
we move through a session like that. And so that's a really important piece, is the integration one, is to learn how to go into activation and come back down again.
Yeah.
And doing that in a safe space can be incredibly healing and incredibly transformative.
Cool.
And when we do it in person, so I do these sessions online, but when we do them in person, we also use body work. So we facilitate a repatterning of the breath. And so we can see when someone's lying there and they're breathing, I can see exactly where the breath is going and where it's not flowing, you know? And I mean, yes, we talk a lot about chest breathers and belly breathers and stuff, but there's so much more that the breath is doing in the body. And so we can use touch to facilitate an opening up of the breath, and for the breath to really be connected and flowing. And by doing that, I mean, yes, we can also encourage or motivate maybe more of emotional release, or I mean, it's a very for me it's a very fascinating modality because for one,
Is that, can I say, is that beyond, when you say open it with a breath, is that beyond rib kinematics in terms of like what we would typically think for like breathing movement, in terms of like the movement of the
yeah, it goes
of the rib
beyond that.
cage?
If I wanna look at the breath as really a wave going all the way from the pelvis, the hip area, right? All the way up to the collarbones in a way. Obviously, I only want about, maybe 20 or 30% movement up here, most of the movement coming from the diaphragm area and the belly. But that's kind of what I would love to see in a nice sort of flow in and out and this wave. And a lot of times, especially people holding a lot of emotions and holding a lot of trauma, you see that somewhere the breath is stuck. We isolate the breath, or the chest, or we isolate the belly, or there's
I think
stuckness.
rib kinematics will explain, your first rib is higher than your collarbone. Like it,
Yeah, true.
I think people potentially, when we talk about rib mechanics, maybe think of like, just those lower two ribs moving, whereas like the whole rib cage has got potential to move posteriorly. So anyway, I've done a couple of workshops and events in person with Jamie Clements, Breath Space. He's going to come on the podcast as well.
Nice.
And when he's been teaching his section, I've done the conscious connected breathing twice when he's been leading it. So I have
good.
some as in a first person experience of what he's saying. And so conscious connected breathing, transformational breathing, holotropic, hyperventilation as a tool. Where does the somatic, because the other one you mentioned was somatic.
Somatic experiencing.
Where does that fit in?
Yeah, so here's where
unless you've got anything else to say about those other ones.
No, yeah, those are the main ones that I utilize in my work with clients and workshops and stuff. And this is where things get interesting because so yes, on the one hand, we have functional breathing, breath coaching, regulating breathing practices that we can do on a daily basis. Then we have the transformational style breathwork that I would recommend only doing maybe, I don't know. I mean, I do it maybe once a month currently, but let's say maybe once a week. If you're going through a really rough time and you just, need it, then maybe twice a week. But then it's really important to combine it with a functional breathing practice. Right?
Yeah, that was one question I wanted to ask, actually. I love that you emphasized that point. I think that would be obvious for people in terms of what I would be like, yeah, you need to make sure you got your functional breathing. But that was a question I forgot. I was thinking I needed to ask. That you're suggesting once a month or once a week, like, those time frames. And so where does, how do I ask this question? How do I ask this question right? If someone's doing Wim Hof, you haven't talked about Wim Hof Method, but that again is a hyperventilation practice. The number of people that choose to do that every day, like where does that sit with you? Someone doing that every single day? I can see you smiling. Go on, let you. Where does that sit for you?
Yeah, so much to say on this, really.
Is it a can of worms? Sorry.
Sorry
if that's too much.
Sort of. I think it has a lot to do with intention. And that's where that's why I differentiate between transformational style breathwork and Wim Hof, because the Wim Hofers, their intention of doing the Wim Hof breathing every single day is very different from the intention that we have when we do transformational breathwork. Okay. The way I see it, right? And there might be Wim Hofers that disagree, but the way I use transformational breathwork is to really to close these stress cycles, to get in touch with my body, with these suppressed emotions, and maybe also get in touch with my higher intelligence and whatnot. For me, a lot of Wim Hofers, and I'm not saying all of them, but I see a lot of them, are chasing the high of doing the practice.
I've never heard the term Wim Hofer before, but I quite like it. A hopper.
Hoffers. And that's not how I teach transformational breathwork. It's not about chasing the high. You might see a lot of people on social media going really into these big cathartic moments and experiences and going super wild. This is not something that we necessarily encourage, the way that I and my partner and I teach breathwork. And because it's not necessary. You don't need the crazy catharsis to have a meaningful experience and to close the stress cycle. It's not necessary.
And I also just want to, I'm not making fun of anybody. There'll be tons of people that listen to this podcast that will enjoy doing the Wim Hof method for very different reasons at very different times. And I just, the term Wim Hof, I just never heard the term before. So we're not here to, I'm
not making fun of him. I'm not being judgmental.
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to say.
No, it's just what I see and what I observe. And a lot of the people that come to my work as well, they come from, practicing Wim Hof breathing for a long time. And so what I see is that a lot of people chase the high, and essentially what it means is they chase the adrenaline. And the thing is, we already live in such a massively adrenalized world, looking at our lifestyles and looking at our stress levels and the chronic pains and the chronic illness and whatnot. And so we already have enough adrenaline running in our bodies and cortisol. And so that is my personal opinion. I don't necessarily think that Wim Hof breathing, doing it on a daily basis, is necessarily really helping, helping a regulated nervous system or helping to establish a functional breathing pattern. And I mean, there's one study,
it's fair and rational,
by Cox, who looks at how Wim Hof breathing impacts our CO2 levels. And the result is not positive. And so that's how I look at it. I'm not saying Wim Hof breathing is bad per se. I'm just saying I think we need to be more intentional with how we use it. And I wouldn't promote it as a daily practice. Again, I would use it like transformational breathwork, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. Maybe use it before you do your ice bath or whatnot. But I don't even think that's necessary. I know a lot of people who do ice baths and they don't do the Wim Hof breathing.
I do a lot of ice. I don't, and this is one day we'll get him on the podcast. But as far as I'm aware, and as I've seen, and I've been to a Wim Hof event, he wasn't running it. You don't do hyperventilation and then jump in water. They're two separate things.
Right. Right.
But there was something I was going to ask you then. It was something quite good. I can't remember now.
Well, where I was going to go, maybe I'll come back. Where I was going to go now, though, is that now somatic experiencing, it's not a breathing practice. It's a modality to treat trauma, really. And it's it's trauma therapy, and it's called somatic experiencing because it's really about getting into the body, getting out of our heads, because we can't really, heal our traumas by analyzing them and thinking about them, because, they're not about the event. The trauma is not the event. And it's about what happens in our bodies. It's about how our nervous system responds. And it's about the reactions from the event that still live on in our bodies that have not been metabolized yet, the stress cycles that have not been able to complete. And so somatic experiencing is a way that we can utilize the sensations in our bodies and get familiar with them in response to, getting activated. But also we can use somatic experiencing to even just explore our capacity for joy. Like, what does joy feel like in your body, Jacko? Like, how do you know that you're experiencing joy, right? And rather than just thinking about it and analyzing why you're experiencing joy, it's about getting into your body and noticing the sensations that you feel when you experience joy. And the same we can do the same thing for any other emotion, and eventually we get to get closer to the actual trauma, and that can be a shock trauma, but developmental trauma, birth trauma. I mean, those are traumas that we can't even access with words because we didn't have words when they happened, right? And so somatic experiencing helps us to access what's stored in our bodies, helps us to bring it to the surface and really reestablish that somatic connection to our bodies. And somatic experiencing is not a fan of holotropic breathwork, transformational breathwork, generally not a fan of breathwork in general, or using the breath. And I think a lot of times these modalities, let it be somatic experiencing, let it be Wim Hof, let it be holotropic breathwork or oxygen advantage, it's almost like they're all religions and they all believe in this one God, right? And it's got to be this way, and this is how we do it, and we believe in X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, yo, can we just like break all this up and just open it all up and see how they relate and how we can use them together? And that's what I do in my work, is that I see the potential of the synergies that different modalities that are very separate from each other and different from each other, and have very different belief systems. And I'm like, no, like we can totally combine them and connect them. And I've for myself on my healing journey, and to establish a regulated nervous system and to heal my traumas, that combination has been golden of somatic psychotherapy, like somatic experiencing, transformational breathwork, but also, Buteyko, oxygen advantage. Been huge. So
no, I love that. I love the
essence of my work.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing and giving us we went around all the different ways that we can use breathing, and I love that. I love that concept of like connecting these different things, but also that word used. I wrote it down. I was like, that's the title of this episode, like opening up of all these different modalities, rather than them being separate. The thing that I was going to, I guess it wasn't even a question, it was when you were talking about like almost too much of anything. So like, with CO2 tolerance, we'd say like, we need to improve our CO2 tolerance. Like carbon dioxide is a good thing. It's not waste product. But if you inhaled pure CO2, like the air, CO2 in the air that you breathe in now is like 0.004%. If you breathe in pure CO2, you die. Like it would change the pH of your blood. So too much of anything. And I think we forget that, don't we? Just generally in life. But no, thank you so much. If people, I know that people will probably have a lot of questions. People might have some quite personal questions that they don't want to. They want to speak to you directly, or if people want to follow your work. What's the best way people can connect with you and maybe take a bit of a deeper dive with work with you online or events that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm mainly active on Instagram, just like Jacko is. Well, actually, you're more active than I am on Instagram.
I'll check my screen. Like I'll tell my I did. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your screen?
The iPhone will tell you how long you've been on.
No, you're just really effective with posting, I guess. So Instagram, it's breathwork.alchemy, and otherwise I have a website where you can connect with me. Of course, I have a newsletter that I send out that I think is really awesome. Comes out every month, and that's at breathworkalchemy.co. And I have a teacher training for anyone who's German speaking currently only, at intosomabreathwork.com. And so we sort of combine all of these different worlds that I just talked about. We combine all of that in a 9-month training, and
Cool. So
Thanks for
if
having me,
anyone that wants
Jacko.
to take a proper deep dive, 9 months of education and training, I think even just the duration of it says that like you're taking you're taking a deep dive and you're going to come out of that,
Yeah.
well adversed in this, which I think is
I think it's about embodiment at the end of the day. And I think
yeah.
it takes time to embody
Yeah, for sure.
something.
For sure.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
We'll put those links in the show notes for people. So if you don't yet follow Conni on Instagram, head over there and obviously you can connect there. And then those links for the website, the newsletter, and the
Thanks for
teacher
having
training
me,
course.
Jacko.
No,
Yeah.
thank you for spending the time
Sure.
being on the Between Breaths podcast.
Yeah.
So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did, speaking with Conni, that rounded approach, and what I always sort of come back to with things is, are they sensible and are they rational? And so some of those concepts and principles that she works by, of ensuring someone that has their breathing assessed, if they're going to work with her, to assess the breathing, to see where they're at with their breathing, to work on their functional breathing and their bolt score, etc., before doing some more challenging breath work, which may involve hyperventilation if appropriate, as well as how often should we be doing hyperventilation practices if that is something you're going to do. So to me, very sensible, very rational, and certainly someone that I encourage you to go and check out her work if her story resonated with you. So do check out the links in the show notes for that. And also, if you haven't either give us any feedback or reviewed the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love you to do a little review wherever you listen to the podcast, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, wherever else. And really appreciate the support of the podcast. It helps it to grow, it helps us to get more guests on. And if you have any recommendations or people you would like to see come on as a guest, please do get in touch. You can either message me on Instagram, jacko.david.jackson, or you can drop me an email at david.jackson@oxygenadvantage.com. So thanks for listening. I've been breathing. No, you've been breathing. I don't even know my own tagline. You've been breathing. I've been listening. Until next time. What am I actually? I didn't even say that, did I? You've been breathing. I can't even remember what it is now. What is it? You've been listening. I've been breathing. No? Until next time, we'll keep it nasal. I need to stop having breaks in between these podcasts. It's something like that. It definitely finishes with keep it nasal.